What would you do if a child no one else could see stood beside your hospital bed and told you she knew why you were sick? How'd you explain a little girl in a dirty nightgown appearing in a locked ward, whispering warnings no living child should know? What would you do if the first spirit you ever saw wasn't trying to scare you, but begging you to tell the truth? And what would you do if, years after seeing ghostly children run toward darkness, you felt a pain in your chest and somehow knew death was coming? As ever, we can't guarantee you answers, we can only share and you make up your own mind. But this is part one of a two-part experience I think you will all enjoy, for the most terrifying of reasons. Live from Liverpool, the Dark Paranormal with Kevin Eustace. Hello everyone and welcome back to our midpoint of the season already. That's right, it's episode 5, and what we have for you today is something we very, very rarely do. As you heard in the intro, this is part 1 of a 2-part experience. Because today we begin the first part of a deeply personal and unsettling account, tracing one listener's life from childhood trauma into a series of paranormal encounters that seem to appear at the exact moment she needs warning, protection, or proof that something unseen is close by. Over these 2 episodes, we'll follow hospital apparitions, locked room visitations, haunted residential schools, figures in cemeteries, impossible dreams, family tragedies, and the recurring presence of those who may have returned from beyond to guide, guard, or even forewarn. But as our tale unfolds, the questions become harder to ignore. Are these encounters born from grief, trauma, or is something truly reaching through the darkness? Maybe to protect Catherine, our submitter. As we said, this is part 1. We conclude next week with part 2, of course, where the story goes even deeper. I will give you all a small trigger warning here. This episode does contain references to childhood sexual abuse, suicide, child death, and violent bereavement. But for now, please lower the lights, make yourself comfortable, and of course, leave your disbelief at the door. And join me as we all hear about The Watching Dead, the beginning. I've been listening to your podcast now for a few months, and I have to say, I feel as though I've found somewhere I can be open about my own experiences without judgment. My paranormal experiences all began when I was 11, and still occasionally happen at the age of 42. Not only have I had a few encounters with spirits, my 2 oldest girls were very open also. I'm not sure if this will be too long for you to share on your podcast, but as I stated, just having a safe space to share and not be called silly or get dismissed is enough for me. I come from a very broken family, marred with trauma, violence, and death. My childhood was at first a wonderful time. I had loads of friends, and we would be out playing every minute of the day that we weren't at school. I spent a lot of time with my nana at her house, as, out of my brother, sister, and I was truly her favourite. She made no secret of this either, and not only did it cause animosity between my siblings and I, It caused a lot of arguments between my aunts and my mum. I was named after my nana, including her middle name, which I've always been proud of. Well, that was until a few skeletons fell out of her closet. More about that later. Let's say my nana liked a drink. Not from the moment she got up, but more of a social drinker, which was at least a few days a week and especially at weekends. She would toddle off to bingo afternoon sessions and come home with her friends for a wee afternoon drink at her house. Don't get me wrong, she may have had a drink, but come 5 p.m, when Grandad came home, the house was empty and his dinner was piping hot on the table. No washing up for him. These people she would bring home were questionable in the hygiene and their morals, to which I paid the ultimate price at one of their hands over the course of a few years. I won't go into too much detail, but I was 9 years old and introduced to a group of predators brought to my nana's home by this person. I feel this was the start of the darkness that began to follow me. By age 11, I had been admitted to our local children's hospital due to vomiting blood umpteen times. I underwent many investigating surgeries and tests to find out what was causing this, but the doctors were perplexed. I never opened up until I met a little girl who said she knew why I was so sick. As I lay in my bed in the hospital watching the nurses go about their duties, this little girl would just appear next to my bed. She had long brown hair, just like mine, but her nightgown wasn't very clean, it seemed to me. She would just stand there staring at me and then whisper, "I know why you're sick." Other times she would just stand there with these sad eyes, staring at me. The doctors had begun to notice that I was a withdrawn child and introduced me to a psychiatrist. Every day this man would come to visit me and we would walk away from my bed to room 3 on the ward. Outside of this room I would always see the little girl in the dirty nightgown. I still remember thinking, why didn't her mummy bring her a change of clothes like my mummy did? But as a child, my mind wandered elsewhere, and usually it was trepidation of going into this room to talk. I remember this one morning, the nurse came to me with a basket of fruit saying it was from my uncle. Now, to be clear, this was not a blood relative, and just a reminder I was on this man's mind. Even at the age of 11, I knew it was a warning of sorts. So I told the nurse I felt too sick to see the doctor in room 3. As I lay on my side staring out of the window, I felt someone perch on the side of my bed, right behind me. Automatically I began to feel intense fear, but I rationalized that I was in a hospital. The nurse's station was directly across from my bay, and no one could get to me. I slowly turned onto my back to find the little girl with the dirty nightgown. She looked different than usual, but at first I didn't notice what it was. I shifted onto my side to face her and noticed she was crying. Not sobbing, but tears were slowly rolling over her white cheeks. I whispered, "Are you feeling sick? Should I get the nurse?" But she shook her head. I asked her what was wrong, and she glanced down the corridor to room 3. I have to say here that, with meeting the psychiatrist daily, I had begun to build a trust with him, a relationship of sorts, and was even contemplating telling him my darkness. I'd even thought that this would be the day, but that basket reminded me of the warnings I had to heed. Noticing the little girl staring down the corridor, I asked if she too saw this doctor. She nodded. She gazed at me and whispered, "I know why you're sick," but this time added, "Just like me." I remember feeling violently sick, and I rushed to the bathroom where I was found by a domestic on the floor, surrounded by blood. I'd passed out whilst vomiting, and there was blood everywhere, or so it seemed to me. The nurses got me back into bed, a doctor examined me, and they were all asking what happened, but I didn't say a word. Well, until my mum came up to visit me. I told her about the little girl visiting me, and her saying she knew why I was sick. My mum told me that maybe the little girl had seen me being sick, and that's what she meant. But deep down, I knew better. Once Mum left, the nurse came over to do her observation checks and was asking about my friends at home, my siblings and such, and she sat on the bed. Now, I don't know why I chose this time. Maybe it was her soft, caring tone, or the fact I could see the little girl hovering by the nurse's station. But I whispered, "I know what's making me sick." The nurse told me I could tell her anything, so I said there was a little girl in the ward who'd been to visit me, and she was as sick as me. The nurse looked confused as she looked around the bed bay where I was. 2 other children were there, both recovering from an appendectomy, and one other bed lay empty. She calmly asked me who the girl was, what her name was, but I shrugged, saying she didn't tell me. But her nightgown's always dirty, and her hair was like mine. The nurse stood quickly off my bed and looked around. She asked me when I last seen this girl. I said, "She's over there by the nurse's station." I looked over, but she wasn't there anymore, and the nurse looked shocked. She told me she'd be back to see me in a bit, and told me to try and get some rest. I couldn't do much anyway, as I was attached to some fluid drips to help my dehydration, plus some other medications. As I lay there, I could see the little girl stood outside room 3, as if waiting for the door to open, and the doctor to invite her in. At that same time, the secured entrance doors to the ward opened, and the psychiatrist came into the corridor. I wasn't sure how, but now the little girl was beside my bed, and she whispered, "Tell him we are sick. Please tell him." The doctor, being small and slightly round with a very friendly face, was quite jovial as he walked past some of the staff, saying hello and asking how we all were, while still slowly walking past room 3 and coming straight to my bed. He asked if it was okay if he sat beside me and talked, and I just nodded. This was unusual, as he never came to my bed to talk. Yet here he was, with a very kind expression on his face. He said that the nurse had called to say there'd been an incident in the bathroom, and she felt I could use someone to talk to. I nodded, and from the corner of my eye, there beside the nurse that I'd spoken to as she sat at the nurse's station, was the little girl, slightly smiling as if to encourage me. So I said to the doctor, "I know what's making me sick. Actually, I know who has made me sick." After opening up, as you can well imagine, there was a whirlwind of police visits, social work visits, my mum being told in room 3, from where along the corridor I could hear her screams, but there was no little girl. I was in the hospital for a further 2 weeks, and then transferred to an adolescent psychiatric unit. In those 2 weeks, I didn't see the little girl, other than when I asked my mum if she could ask the nurses where she was. Mum said there was no other little girls on the ward, and maybe I'd been dreaming about her. Maybe I had. I was, after all, severely traumatized, and a traumatized mind can make you imagine things, eh? After a small stay at the adolescent unit, I was deemed fit to go home. But in that unit, I saw things an 11-year-old child should not see. There were many other teenagers in there who had all other issues ranging from schizophrenia to OCD, but one thing I will never, ever forget was the suicide of another girl in the unit. She was maybe 15 years old. I remember she always spoke so fast, like she had too many words in her brain and had to get them all out now. She would walk around talking, and then she would have what I now recognize as a neurodivergent meltdown. But at that time, girls didn't have these issues. We were just hormonal. She would be physically restrained and put into a room to be medicated. The night she died, I remember waking during the night and feeling cold. The covers had slipped from my shoulders and the air was biting at my skin. I remember trying to pull my covers up, but I couldn't. It was like something or someone was sitting on my bed and wouldn't move. I opened my eyes, and there, sat perched on the bed, was this girl. What was strange was two things. One, my door was closed and locked, and two, she was quiet. Deathly quiet. I'd never not heard her voice when she was around, so this scared me. I asked quietly if she was okay, and she turned her head to look at me, smiled and said, "Now it's all quiet." I was so very confused because the words were slow and not her usual rushed tone. I glanced at the door and noticed it was still closed. I turned to look at her, and she was gone. Not over to the other side of the room or into the adjoining bathroom, just gone. Like she hadn't been there at all. All of a sudden, there were loud voices, an alarm going off, people running up and down the corridor, and all other kids banging on their windows and doors, shouting, asking what was going on. After what felt like hours, the staff began opening our doors and asking us to move along to the dining room. As the crowd in there got bigger, so did the noise. Everyone was asking what was happening. Where was this girl? I heard a few people say, "Oh, maybe she's ran away. Maybe she's battered one of the staff." Not one person said what I was thinking. Maybe she's dead. You see, in the time I'd left the children's hospital and got to the psychiatric hospital, I'd pretty much figured out that the girl in the dirty nightgown was a spirit. My mum had done some digging around, talked to some nurses, and when relaying the information to my nana, she wasn't very quiet, so I heard all about the little girl who'd been seen in the corridors and by abused girls. Remembering that I'd seen this girl in my locked room, I knew she was dead. I knew deep in my 11-year-old heart that even though she was dead, she was at peace. The staff slowly walked into the dining room and asked us all to sit down, which we did. They said there'd been an incident and that the girl had been found dead in her room. There was a mixture of emotions, from nervous laughs to outright sobbing. I just sat there thinking I want to go home now. I'm not sure what happened to everyone else, but I was taken to the office where I sat outside as the staff called my mum and came and told me that I would be going home sooner than arranged. I was due to be released back into my mother's care on the Monday, but due to circumstances, I was discharged on the Friday, with me returning weekly for therapy. No one ever mentioned that girl again. Not the therapist person, not my mum, or even the two people I stayed in touch with from that unit. And due to the turmoil I was about to experience, I soon forgot about her too. You see, as I stated at the beginning of this email, my life was marred with trauma, violence, and death to a severe degree, and all before I was 16. When I was just 12, I was deemed too unsettled to return to school and to my family home. I was removed from my mum's car and put into a girls' residential school in Bishopton. I always felt this was my punishment for speaking out about my abuse. And to my amusement, the other girls who were in this school with me, well, most of them, were all there because of the same thing. Now, this school had been ran by nuns, and even though it was now run by the local authority, it still had a few nuns on the ground, and all, and I mean all, the creepy religious statues that were all placed in alcoves along the dark corridor were still there. Walking to classes, no matter the time of day, felt as though you were walking in the dead of night with all these judging eyes on you. I'm now a converted Catholic, but back then I was just a simple Church of Scotland Christian child. A spattering of religious knowledge that consisted of knowing the Our Father and that Mary had a baby in a manger, maybe a few hymns taught in primary school. I think if I had been raised Catholic, those statues would have been even more foreboding. I was only placed here for 6 weeks, and by God, I'm glad I was. For due to many night terrors, I was unable to sleep. I'd spend many hours in the night pacing my room or sat at the window watching wildlife. I've always been fascinated with foxes, so I would often watch as they would scurry through the woodland which surrounded the school. The grounds were lovely during the day, but at night, they were terrifying. Okay guys, I need to talk to you about money. Why? Well, it's high on my agenda at the moment as I'm looking to move not just house, but country. So I have a money goal that I'm really striving to achieve. And let's just say, to say I've got some way to go is an understatement. But I'm trying not to fixate on where my money is now, because so many people are focused on where their money is today. Acorns is the financial wellness app that cares about where your money's going tomorrow. And something I think is wonderful that Acorns have is the Acorns Potential screen, so you can find out what your money is capable of. You guys know I've worked with Acorns for a while, and the reason I love working with them is because they take away the scare factor from investing. But in reality, investment and investing should mean the same for one person as it does for the next. Acorns is a smart way to give your money a chance to grow. It's easy. You can sign up in minutes and start automatically investing your spare money, even if all you've got spare change. Acorns is an all-in-one. No more finance apps cluttering up your phone. With Acorns, you can invest, save, and give your money a chance to grow in one trusted place. Sign up now and Acorns will boost your new account with a $5 bonus investment. Join the over 14 million all-time customers who've already saved and invested over $27 billion with Acorns. Paid on client endorsements. Compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 2 compensation provided. Potential subject to various factors such as customers' accounts, age, and investment settings. Does not include Acorns fees. Results do not predict or represent the performance of any Acorns portfolio. Investment results will vary. Investing involves risk. Acorn Advisors LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/Dark Paranormal. In the countryside, where a city girl like I could hear noises I never had experienced, and due to the ghostly experiences before, I was always hyper-vigilant. There was a long drive that came from the main road to the school that in the light of the moon looked eerie and uninviting. As I sat one night staring up that drive, I saw what I thought were two girls running up the driveway, and then what looked like a nun standing off the road, staring. And then they all disappeared. Well, I shit myself and jumped straight into bed. I didn't want the nun telling the staff that I was also awake. Yet, in the morning, all the girls were present for breakfast. The staff were all in a good mood and we were all sent to our classes. On our way, I asked one of the other girls, who was a bit older than me, if anyone had run away last night. She said that no one had, although she thought about it every night. I asked her if the nuns were still looking after the girls in the school, and she said that the nuns were all elderly and were rarely ever seen. Of course, of the 6 weeks I was there, I saw the same 2 girls and the same nun on the driveway a good few times. Always the same scenario, except one night, when both the girls, instead of just disappearing, ran into the woods in the direction of the bridge. The following day, I was to be sent back home to try to get into a normal life. I wasn't like a lot of the girls whose homes were unsuitable and not safe, so I was getting packed up. I asked my key worker about the girls in the grounds and why they were allowed out at night. She shook her head and said, now that I was leaving, she could tell me the truth. She explained that not everyone who goes into these schools have the best of experiences, and that when the nuns had ran the place, some of the sisters were exceptionally cruel. So cruel, in fact, that the girls were left in utter despair and were broken in their minds. She said they were degraded constantly, and in such despair, a few girls had even taken their own lives. Imagine being in a place that was supposed to protect you from the abuse you were suffering in your home environment, but instead use that abuse to degrade you and make you feel guilty for what you'd endured. As I said earlier, when I saw the girls running, they were running through the woods to the bridge. And yes, this bridge is where a few of those girls, sadly, took their own lives. My key worker said that now the local authority was in charge, this didn't happen anymore. How mistaken was she, as many years later there were more reports of girls jumping from that same bridge. By now I realized that I quite possibly could see some kind of spiritual things, but being so young I had no idea how to fully comprehend it, or what was to come. I left that school and tried so hard to fit back in at home in high school, but I was already treated differently by my teachers, so I had difficulty settling back into class. A class of 28 students when classes I had been in were between 6 and 8. Not only that, but all of my family members treated me differently. My nana would no longer have me over at her house. I think this was a joint decision, as I had to walk past the house of horrors to get to my nana's house. My stepdad would never be in a room alone with me, and my sister decided that she too would go off the rails a bit, ending up moving out and falling pregnant at the age of 19. I returned to being in care, and at first I was fine. No spooky encounters, just teenagers with their own demons attached. I was in an assessment centre that was near the Firth of Clyde, and just along the way there was a very old cemetery. It is quite common for children in care to run away. Some kids run away to try to get back home, missing their families. Some run away to get drugs or drink or drown out whatever traumas they've endured. Or some run away just because. I was the former. I miss my family so much. I wanted so much to see my sister's ever-growing family. To see my nana, who, even though I didn't go to her house, when I'd have home visits, that is, she would visit me at my mum's or even come to visit me at the centre, taking me into Helensburgh to get some chocolate cake and hot chocolate. One evening I found the opportunity and I ran away. I slipped out the unit I was in. I started heading towards Helensburgh, hoping to catch the train, and then the rain came. Heavy lashings of rain that had me soaked within minutes. So I ran up a path which, of course, took me into that cemetery. Now, a teenager with an overactive imagination in a dark cemetery is not good. so I found myself walking towards a groundkeeper's house, rethinking my decision to run away, when I saw a young woman walk in front of me. I said, quite meekly, "Excuse me, can you tell me where I can find a phone, please?" She turned, smiled, and pointed to the groundskeeper's house. I walked over, I knocked at the door, and truthfully said I'd ran away from the assessment centre, and I'd very much like to go back. The lady who opened the door shouted for her husband, who said I could wait in their porch as he called the police. The lady asked me why I ended up at their door, so I explained about the rain and the kind lady who pointed me at their home. She nodded and smiled. She said that this lady likes to point people to the safety of their home, knowing they'll always get help. I didn't think anything of that sentence as the police turned up, shouting at me for wasting their time and such, and whipping me straight back to the unit where I sheepishly apologised, got washed and cried myself to sleep. Now, with this being an assessment centre, I was only placed here until they figured out where to put me next. And during this time, my sister Michelle would visit with my mum and two nieces, Jacqueline and Kate. Michelle was pregnant again, and her boyfriend was an utter arsehole. He was more interested in taking drugs than getting a job to support his family. When I was home for weekend leave, I would hear my mum on the phone, knowing it was Michelle on the other end, begging for money to feed the kids. My mum got wise and actually started taking Michelle for food shopping, nappies for the kids, etc. Meanwhile, I was moved to a different residential school in Stirling. It was a magnificent building, which I hear they're turning into student accommodation after the school was closed down. It was very old, with a heavy wooden door that was as wide as two normal doors, but looked like it belonged on a castle, which was just up the hill. The school was situated on the road that leads to the old town jail, the old hospital, the cemeteries, as well as the castle itself. All that said, I didn't have any paranormal goings-on at that school. Whilst at that school, I settled in well. There were plans for me to go on day release to an actual school where I would study with normal kids, instead of the reduced classes that were available in the school, but this fell through. It was during my time at this first residential school, my mum's marriage broke apart. My dad, as I called him, couldn't cope that he hadn't been able to protect me and turned to alcohol. I don't quite know what happened, just one day he wasn't there anymore. So as I settled into the new school, I was having regular weekends with mum, and on one weekend, I returned from the train station, bag in hand. As I walked into the hallway, all I heard was my brother say, "Well, at least he died with a blue nose." I was confused. Who had died? And why was my brother making football references? Must be a neighbour or someone we know. There was no mum, no Michelle, but Jacqueline and Katie playing in the living room on the floor with their toys, and my new baby nephew David's pram in the corner. There were two police officers, my nana, and a few neighbours sitting round whispering. It took for me to scream, "Who the fuck has died?" for anyone to even notice that I'd walked in the room. The police started towards me, but Nana got there first, saying that our David, our precious little baby David, had died. After that moment, life was a blur. I was excused from school for a few weeks and funeral arrangements were organised. My sister brought my nephew home and sat with him for a few days in his nursery, leaving only to use the bathroom. It was on one of these bathroom breaks that I asked if I could go in and see him. Michelle graciously allowed me to. I wish I hadn't, as there was our beautiful 6-week-old David, but still. No sounds, no movement, just stillness. Until I saw his chest rise. I blinked and surely I saw it again. I ran from the room and shouted that David was breathing. Michelle ran into the room only to find her son the way she had left him. I'd imagined it all, and I'd broke my sister's heart all over again. I felt awful. I told my nana what I'd seen, and even explained that he wasn't ashen-coloured, he was pink, and was slightly wriggly. Nana said that her mum often seen people once they'd passed over, like an acknowledgement they were okay. She felt maybe this is what I'd seen too. Life was tough for our Michelle, but after a little while she was pregnant again. We often said that Michelle would always be pregnant if she could. Now I began to have weekend leave every weekend until Mum got remarried and moved herself to England to be with her new husband. Now, I say that bitterly as a 14-year-old girl, as then I felt abandoned. It was also fueled by the staff who would openly talk about how a mother could trade her child for a man. But as an adult, I fully understand why she made that choice. I was allowed 1 weekend a month to go and visit my mum, but her husband didn't quite like me. He had reason to, of course. I was a stroppy teenager who partially blamed her mother for all her issues. On their wedding day, as the registrar said, "Does anyone have any legal issues with this marriage?" I tried to stand up, but my sister held me down. She whispered that my mum deserved to be happy, and I should grow up. I sulked all day in the back garden where everyone was celebrating. I felt like another piece of my life had been taken away. Little did I know, not even 4 weeks later, the last piece of normality was to be ripped away. My sister gave birth to another son. She named him Brian with a Y. The reason for this is because she always spelled her friend Brian's name Brain, and didn't want to give her son the unfortunate possibility of the same. As Brian approached 8 months old, Michelle decided she needed him to be baptized, and I was honoured to be asked to be his godmother. 14 years old, and my sister felt I was responsible enough to have this role. I was in awe. You see, my sister was an amazing mother, someone I aspired to be like. She devoted all her time to the kids. She was forever at the park or reading to them, singing them songs as she made dinner. They didn't have a lot then, but by God were those kids loved. Brian was baptized on the Sunday and I returned to school on the Monday, full of happiness and resolutions that I was going to knuckle down and be a great auntie to the kids, as well as a great godmother to Brian. On the Thursday morning, I awoke at 6:30 a.m. and lay there thinking of the kids and what I was going to do at the weekend with them. We could walk through the park even though it was October and it would be wet. The kids could wear wellies. At 7 a.m, I began to get a pain in my chest, like I couldn't breathe properly. And it scared me, but no sooner did it start than it stopped. I got up, I got ready, and I went to my classes. Break time arrived and I was stopped by my key worker to take a call. I assumed it was my social worker, and I asked for them to tell her I would call her back as I needed the bathroom. Realistically, I wanted a fag in the break room. Yes, we were allowed to smoke even at age 14 back then. My key worker said it was my nana, and that I was to go to the headmaster's office now. Now, this was highly unusual as we all took calls, either in the small office or the staff room. Off I went along the corridor, and as I approached the office, I noticed a few members of staff along the wall, lingering. All I could think was, oh, my wee granddad's died. I answered the phone. I heard soft sobbing of my nana, which all but confirmed my granddad was dead. And then she said the words, "Michelle, is dead. I screamed and screamed until it hit me. Where were the kids? So I asked. She said they'd died too. They'd all died in a fire that morning. I knew in that moment that feeling in my chest that I had was me being forewarned of what was coming. The pain I was in is indescribable. I came out of that office to find almost every member of staff stood like a barricade to the main part of the school, but I just turned and went to my room. I stayed there in my thoughts until my roommate came hurtling through the door, throwing herself at me, sobbing as though it was her sister, her family that had died. At that moment, I knew. I had to pack my bag and I had to get home. I've no idea what went into my bag, but I knew that I grabbed my funeral dress as I said out loud, Michelle chose this for David's funeral. She must have known it would be for hers too. My roommate looked at me as if I'd gone mad. Maybe I had. Who knows? Who knows what was going on in my head then? The whole day was a blur of going from school to being in my social worker's car. I still didn't quite believe it, so I asked if we could drive past the house. I needed to see with my own eyes. As we drove towards the house, my social worker was whittling on about me not doing anything stupid like jumping out of the car. But all I could see was Michelle and the kids at the window waving to me. I said this to my social worker, who said that's impossible, the windows have been blown out with an explosion. We drove to my nana's house, where the family were beginning to gather, and I sat in utter silence until it hit me my mum wasn't there. I was instantly on my feet again, trying to get to the phone, but Nana touched my shoulder, and I sat in silence again. No words were needed, I knew she was on her way. And I watched my mum crumble into her own mum's arms as she fell through the door. The agonising wails of a mother who had lost her firstborn as well as her firstborn grandchildren. The days after were silent or filled with these anguished cries. So much so I retreated to my bedroom, sitting listening to music. I listened to Bon Jovi's Crossroads album for what seemed like weeks on repeat. It was a balm on my broken heart. The funeral was horrific. My sister had been found with her arms around all three of the children so in death. Brian was placed in her arms, whereas the girls had their own tiny white coffins. Out of all the details of these days, the one that sticks is the Undertaker. I was sure I'd seen him before, but not at a funeral. This guy was mega creepy looking. Like, even if he was in swimming trunks, you would know he was surrounded by death. It wasn't until months later, when I'd returned to school, I remembered where I'd seen him. I'd been dreaming of him weeks before Michelle's death. He was just hanging around in the background of my dreams, if that makes sense. Not the main character per se. Well, Catherine, I genuinely do not know what to say other than I can't believe there's a part 2 to this. And I am so eternally sorry for everything you've been through. Yes, we've had pieces of absolutely heartbreaking news or information or stories and narratives, but this consecutive bombardment that you seem to have received up to your mid-teens is bordering on unbelievable. But don't worry, I believe every single word. I'm absolutely flabbergasted that there's a part 2. And our team, when sending this one through, said it's quite long. We've split it into 2. Both parts are still quite long. Do you want to use them? And I simply said, well, what's part 1 like? And the reply was, well, I'm crying and I'm terrified. And I said, send it through. We'll use that. We'll use both. So, Catherine, thank you for your comment at the start where you say you feel like you have a place where you can share this without being dismissed. 100%. I say that we're here so we can collate this generation's paranormal darkness. We're also here for people like yourself. Arguably, it's more important that we're here for people like yourself. And next week, I've told the team I'm not going to pre-read the experience. I do this with our Dark Bite stories too, because I did pre-read this. And in truth, although it was still a very emotional thing to read, I know it would have been a world different had I not known what was coming. And I won't for next week. So, Catherine, thank you so much for this email. And truly, on behalf of myself, my team, all of the listeners, our deepest condolences for everything that you've been through and the losses that you've suffered. You clearly have an incredible disposition. Clearly. So, I know words, especially from me, are meaningless, but you need to be commended for that. Okay. Now, for anyone listening, if you've got your own personal paranormal experience, you can find the link to send yours in and be brave like Catherine and do so if you think that maybe you're on the edge or you're on the fence. It will be treated with the utmost respect, and I can guarantee you won't just be dismissed. The link's in the show notes, or you can go to thedarkparanormal.com and click on Submit My Experience. Also in the show notes, you'll find the link to our Patreon. Supporting the Patreon allows me to do this show. It's as simple as that. On the first level, you will receive episodes ad-free, the second level early and ad-free, and the third level early, ad-free, and 2 extra shows each and every week just for that tier. That's around an hour and 20 minutes worth of shows each week, 52 weeks a year. But I'm going to leave that promotion part there and say, Catherine, once again, thank you. And I don't know what else to say if I just have a perfectly human moment. So, please join us next week when we will conclude Catherine's email. Until then, stay safe and take care.